welcome back to the Agora stage. I'm going to get it right. My name is Martine Saint-Victor. Much to my mother's chagrin, I am not a lawyer, but I do care about the law. And I think if you're here, you care about the law, or you care about AI, or you care about how the law affects AI, and vice versa. That makes sense? We're going to deep dive on how AI is transforming the law with two panelists shortly, but before that, we have a treat. To set the table, we have David Lametti. David Lametti, right now, is a partner at Fasken, but before that, he was our Minister of Justice and our Attorney General, not too shabby. Please welcome my friend, David Lametti.
Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Great pleasure to be here today to speak to you, lay the table, as it were, for some really good panelists, including one of my colleagues, Jocelyn Auger from Fasken, who are coming to speak to you about the landscape changes in law that AI is bringing about. I wanted to do something a little different, talk about AI governance. Prior to being Minister of Justice and Attorney General in 2019, that is from 2016 to 2019, I was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Navdeep Bains. And it was at that point that, in policy terms, we laid out a lot of the architecture for the Canadian AI landscape that we are currently seeing. So, the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, the supercluster policy, which gave us Scale AI, the investments in chairs in CFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, the intellectual property policy, investments in MILA, investments in Vector and AMI, and other strategic fund investments across Canada. So it is a terrain that I know well, and it is a terrain that I loved. My joke to my colleagues is that I would come home every night with a smile on my face, because one thing about working in this space is that everybody's trying to change the world, and everybody's trying to make the world a better place. And that enthusiasm just rubs off, and it's hard not to absorb that. And I was joking with my team at the time, Minister Bain's team, that this particular role was adding years to my life, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But there are challenges. November 30th, 2022 was a day that many of us thought the world changed. That's when ChatGPT hit our computer screens. And for many of us who hadn't perhaps reflected on the idea of generative AI and large language models, all of a sudden we had this interactive partner that we didn't have before, and we were learning to live with it. And you're going to hear from our panelists about it, how this is having an impact in the legal profession. But there was a lot of AI out there before in specific applications in the law, in places like sentencing, but also other applications in terms of society, even on our search engines and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of specific measures in AI that we have also come to live with. And so a lot of AI out there before, in addition to what happened after November 30th, 2022. But what it brought into, I think, serious focus was the idea that we, and I was in government at the time, we in government and we as a society, government being one component of that society, had to think about some of the large governance issues that come with this massive technological change. And we'd seen some of it before, right? I was an intellectual property professor for 20 years at McGill before I jumped into politics. And my graduate work in a variety of different areas, property theory, copyright theory, coincided with the beginning of the internet. Right? I got to the UK to do my graduate degree, and we were using the old VAX systems for email, but it was there. And the rapid change that happened and the impact that the internet had on various substantive areas of law was something that I internalized and took in with respect to my teaching. And some of those very issues are happening today, once again, although in a much more accelerated and perhaps profoundly more transformative fashion. But as people tasked with governance, we need to think about some of the very challenging issues that the rapid change and the scope of change that is being brought about by artificial intelligence is placing in front of us as a society. And I can tell you that's a burden that you bear when you're in government, and that's a burden that you bear when you're in governance, and you have to listen, you have to try to understand the issues. Perhaps the central one is the idea of innovation versus protection of the individual and protection of society's ethical standards and other standards. There is certainly a view that innovation happens much more quickly, much more readily, where there aren't any rules, or where there aren't any guidelines, or where there aren't any standards. Now that's a very simplistic view, but there is certainly truth to that. Versus rules and standards, privacy rules, copyright rules, rules that might protect data as property, for example. All of these kinds of rules, in addition to larger ethical standards and values that we have, rightly have as societies, can be seen as guardrails or even brakes to the kind of technological changes that some kinds of artificial intelligence hold out as a promise. And again, we've seen this before, right? If we had been, no other way to put it, if we'd been anally retentive about copyright in the era of the internet, we would have no internet as we know it. We'd also have no rap music. We'd also have no appropriation art, and Van Gogh would have been called a copyright violator or plagiarist for having copied 21 paintings by Millet, almost identically. So there is this tension between innovation and regulation that, as a regulator, you have to come to terms with, you have to grapple with, you have to listen and interact with stakeholders. And for most of us, including myself, who aren't computer programmers, who aren't necessarily experts, we're experts in law or we're experts in something else, we need to try as best as we possibly can to understand the nature of the technology as you're trying to think through some of the governance strategies that might exist. And there are a number of different tools that you have at your disposal as a legislator. So obviously, there are rules, right? There are laws, there are formal norms that you can use. There are also regulations, which is a slightly more flexible, slightly less onerous kind of formal norm that's out there. But there are also declarations and value statements that a country can put out on its own, as Canada has done, or in conjunction with other countries, such as Bletchley at Hiroshima, where a number of different actors get together and say what we feel as societies we need to do with respect to setting up ethical guidelines for AI. There are also international standards, and here standards organizations take a large role, and people who are programming work, and companies that are developing algorithms will work towards those standards, and that too has a hand in regulating. There's also a role for informal normativity and social norms to help channel certain kinds of developments, particularly in this case, where change is happening so quickly. And again, we've seen this already in the early days of copyright, where rules of thumb began to emerge with respect to people trading and sharing music as between music industry players, but also in other forms of trade on the internet through copyright and trademark, things like wares and that sort of thing. So we have seen social norms spring up amongst programming communities and technological development communities, rules that people abide by because it's the right thing to do. They're very flexible, they change over time. So all of these options exist for government to look at, or other groups to look at, in the attempt to formulate norms and standards, again, in this rapidly changing area. And we do need to think this through. We see impacts on privacy. I mean, perhaps that's one of the biggest tensions right now. And we see the Europeans with the EU AI Act having gone to a risk-based approach that very much puts privacy at the center of what is being, individual privacy at the center of what is being protected, the so-called privacy by design model. Others have begun to perhaps say, well, maybe we could use other kinds of standards, such as civil liability standards, in order to better protect privacy or more efficiently protect privacy in a more flexible way. It's something that we need to think about. Also questions of copyright and the use of materials to teach large language models, for example. That's a bit of a tough one because copyright is about the protection of, I suppose, the aesthetic value of a work. If a word is being used merely as a word, if a word's being used to teach, something that traditionally copyright didn't cover. Is there room perhaps to think about monetizing data in a property-like fashion as opposed to an intellectual property-like fashion? Again, these are all open questions. In all cases, we're thinking about our values as a society. What do we believe in? What do we need to protect? How do we need to protect it? And what kind of shape do we want to give to this massive economic development, which frankly is transforming the economic basis for our society. We're moving to a society where data becomes one of the principal, if not the principal, resources that is out there. And data is being gathered and accumulated in what Professor Shoshana Zuboff from Harvard has called a surveillance economy, where that data is monetized. So these are massive changes. AI is pushing those massive changes, and we need, as a society, and as, when I was in government, as a member of a government, to try to reflect on those kinds of issues. So where are we in Canada? We certainly have a model with the EU AI Act. We have a more flexible model south of the border in the United States. Canada's always somewhere situated between somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, between these two jurisdictions. We have Bill C-27 in front of us, which has a privacy part and it has an AI part. Begins now with the additions at committee to look more like a risk-based European approach with respect to the AI provisions. But I'm not optimistic about C-27 receiving royal assent. Why am I not optimistic? Well, I'm looking at my watch. It's September 2024. The last point in an ideal world that the current government could legislate, or at least the House of Commons, would be June 2025. And in order to get to that point, this bill has to get out of committee in the House of Commons, has to get through third reading, it has to get through the Senate. Then it has to compete in terms of parliamentary time in the House of Commons, won't even get to the Senate, in the House of Commons with budget bills, with fall economic statements, with opposition bills. And that might be successful if it were the only bill going. But there are other bills going and there are other priorities out there that we as a society have deemed to be priorities. And the bill's contested. The Conservative Party has attacked it in committee, and the New Democratic Party has not always been completely supportive of all elements of the bill. So that would be enough to say, I'm skeptical that this will see the light of day. The events of last week exaggerate that tendency even further, because this may become a way for the New Democratic Party to see more light between themselves and the Liberal Party in terms of preparing for upcoming elections, whether they be next month or whether they be in the fall of 2025. So it suffices to say that we are going to be talking about AI governance in Canada extensively for the foreseeable future. So there's a chance here for those of you that thought C27 was inadequate for whatever reason. There's a chance here to do it right. So let's think about what we would like to see. Let's think about the approach that we would like to have in a piece of legislation as one governance tool. Remember, there are all these other ones out there. And to think about the role that we want legislation to play along with these other governance tools as we move forward in this. So there is an opportunity here for those of you that see what might be the demise of C27 as a negative thing. There's a great opportunity here for those who criticize to get their input and to do it right. That's certainly one of the reasons why I am where I am right now, because I hope to play a role in that process. I would add that a couple of other factors make it particularly important for Canada right now. First of all, we are going to host the G7. And artificial intelligence is being advanced as one of the important elements of discussion for this year's G7. And so Canada can play a real leadership role as we look at what Europe is doing, and we see in practice what is happening in Europe, and then we look at what the United States is doing, what Japan is doing. This is a good moment for Canada to lead and to think through and to pick up best practices and perhaps not pick up things that haven't worked so well. And secondly, we're likely going to, well, not likely, there's a roughly 50% chance we're going to have to think about the Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, given what might happen south of the border. And if that's the case, that's another opportunity where we're going to have to think through digital policy. In all cases, if we're investing, in all cases, if we are thinking, and we've got our ideas and our plans moving forward, we can play a role. And if we're investing in infrastructure, if we invest in compute, it's a wonderful moment to bring it all together and to push and be real leaders in an area where we've shown leadership already and where I think we need to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Merci, David. C'était super. Thank you. So I'm going to keep you a little bit. We're going to ad-lib because the crew has to set up the stage, but you opened the door and I have to walk through it. You mentioned south of the border. Did you watch the debate last night?
No, I did indeed.
Hot takes. What are your hot takes?
Well, I had a wonderful existential moment with my two lovely cats last night, and I made them promises that I would never, ever contemplate doing what one of the candidates insinuated that other people were doing with their pets. Yes. Somewhere in Springfield, Ohio, and other places. Right. I love my cats, and I would never do that.
Perfect. And what is your prediction for November 5th?
I think only fools make predictions. Look, I am a progressive. My heart's on my sleeve. I certainly would like to see Kamala Harris be elected President of the United States.
Okay, a round of applause, please, for Kamala. Thank you.
And I'm going to make one partisan comment here. One of the things that the Trudeau government does not get enough credit for is the management of Trump in his first term in office. There were a number of issues, a number of initiatives, including the negotiation of a free trade agreement. You wouldn't have noticed, but there wasn't one stray tweet, there wasn't one stray Facebook post from any member of Parliament, not just Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Independents, Bloc. Everybody was on the same page for 4 years as a government. We simply did not mess up and goad him in any way that was unnecessary.
Well, thank you for that. You were part of that government. That too deserves a round of applause. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
It's always a treat to see you.
Thank you.
Are you sticking around, or your
Yes,
fans are asking for you elsewhere?
I have a couple of things to do, but I will be here.
Very good.
Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you. Maître Lamiti, please. And so now we're going to deep dive into how AI transforms law. I am very, very happy to welcome Jocelyn Auger. Jocelyn is a partner at Fasken. His specialties are information and technology. And if you need a hot take on breaking news on anything AI, Jocelyn's your guy. And and Scott Stevenson, if you're a lawyer, probably you've used Spellbook, which is a very efficient tool to go over contracts. So please, let's welcome them both. Very dramatic music.
Yeah, indeed.
But I like it. Thank you. Jocelyn, talk to us about how AI has influenced or is transforming your practice.
Yeah. You know, it's been a couple of years now since we got hit by the big wave, you know, the Gen AI wave. So the first year basically has been a mix of curiousness, nervousness and despair, and reassurance. So I was quite amazed at the start of starting to play with the ChatGPT 3.0 at the time. You put a prompt, and then a few seconds after that you get an answer. And a few seconds, you know, I'm old enough to remember that back in the day when you used Google, they were all proud to tell you, okay, this answer, they spits you like 24 million search results in 0.00127 seconds. That was super fast. Now it takes seconds. So to me, I told myself, man, there's some real shit going on, you know, under the hood here. So so spitting a lot of answers, and then I realized some of those answers were like just, you know, crappy stuff, you know, just made up stuff. So I went from being super nervous about, you know, losing my job to, all right, maybe there's a sign of hope here after all, because Gen AI is about spitting mediocre results that kind of look legit. And my job as a lawyer is finding the proverbial needle in the haystack. It's a long and painful process, and I'm paid by the hour, so that's cool.
Yes, we know. You're paid by the hour.
So after this first year, I kind of went full circle and was reassured at the end. But I tell you what, not a lot of very productive output came out of that first year.
By the way, I too am old enough to remember when Google
remember
used
that
to.
time,
Yes,
right?
I do remember. So take us through how you use AI has changed, for example, in the past 12 months, because we know it changes so much.
Yeah. So I went from, I guess a lot of people had the same experience. I went from using it as a Google on steroids, or a lazy guy Google, right? Find me the answer. Instead of 20 million results, you would get one answer. We all know it sometimes can be wrong, but I told myself, all those super bright guys and gals, can be wrong about that, right? There must be a way to use that. So I went from using it in that manner to using it more like a tennis partner, right? Endlessly and tirelessly returning the balls. So that's how I use it nowadays. It's to say, I feed an AI tool an argument plan or negotiation plan, and then I asked it to challenge me. So how can it make it better? What are the good stuff, bad stuff? So at the end of the day, you end up with a work product that's human-made, or for the most part, but that's been made better through the use of AI and in a much quicker fashion. So that's how I use it nowadays.
Very good. Scott, when you hear a lawyer talking like that, do you pinpoint what the challenges might be as far as innovation in the next months or the next years?
Totally. So just as background, we were the first company to bring a generative AI copilot to lawyers. And we've seen like the whole wave from ChatGPT to 2 years later now. And I think, yeah, a lot of the challenges you're speaking to around the trust, is it hallucinating? Am I the driver or is it the driver? These are the big things that lawyers are thinking about. And I think one of the things we've seen is going beyond kind of this pure chat interface to what we're trying to build at Spellbook is more like an electric bicycle for lawyers, where you are in the driving seat. It can propel you and push you to drive faster, but the human has, like the way you're using ChatGPT of staying in that driver's seat, I think is really, really important. So I think you'll see more and more tools taking that approach over the coming months, enabling telling users like, no, you can't just go in there blindly and ask the AI to do all your work for you. That's actually not the right way to use it. That's sort of a primitive interface that we have. But instead, really put the users and lawyers in the driver's seat and figure out how do we propel you in your current workflow while you're still have oversight over everything that's happening. So that's something that we're working on a lot at Spellbook. The other thing that I think is really important is this whole hallucination thing happened because of the way these original large language models were trained, where a lot of knowledge was sort of baked into them from sources of varying degrees of quality. But now we have new technology called retrieval augmented generation, which means that we can teach these models to go and find accurate information that they can then bring back to the user, rather than sort of risking this sort of hallucination. So, and models are getting very good at this. There's something called the context window. There's now very big context windows where you can put in lots of trustworthy information that AI can recall, and I think that's going to help a lot over the coming months with those sort of the trust and the fear of that hallucination problem. But it's not the responsibility of companies like ours to bring solutions to those problems.
Can you talk to us a little bit about agent workflow? I know you just mentioned something you're working on, but I know this is something also you have your eye on.
Yeah. So we launched the first sort of generative AI copilot for lawyers in the world in 2022. And now we've just launched what we're calling the first full-fledged agent for legal work. And what this means is going beyond just putting in one chat input and getting one response, and now having this sort of AI, very junior AI colleague who can actually break down problems into steps, execute those steps across multiple documents and multiple applications, and then actually kind of go back and check their work and make sure things are working really well. And I think these agent-based products, which have already taken off in engineering, and I'm an engineer, they're coming to law and they're coming to every other vertical as well. And I think they're going to be bigger than what ChatGPT was itself, because ChatGPT, you're kind of pushing it along with every step, with every chat message. Whereas with an agent, you can delegate entire projects and big workflows, and an agent will go and break that down and work on 20, 30, 40 tasks with your oversight, while you're approving what it's doing and seeing everything that it changes. And that's going to be like I think, the most important advancement in AI over the next year or two. And I think it's going to be, from what we're seeing, bigger than ChatGPT.
I love your analogy with the electric bike, because it reminds us of the role of humans. But in law, like any other industry, I think, when we talk about AI, there's always this philosophical challenge. And I wonder if you have them as well. What do you struggle with when you're using AI or thinking of using AI in your work? The question for you and for you, Scott, both of you, I should say.
If I can go with that, from a philosophical standpoint, in our case, we operate in a regulated profession, right? We can't do anything and everything that we want. And confidentiality is at the heart of what we do. So because of that, whenever you think of using your client's data, which is, of course, confidential, but it can also contain personal information. So whenever you think of using your client's data in an AI tool, then gets of course, the conundrum and knowing what's going on with that. There are some clients that will tell you outright, no, I'm not comfortable because I don't want my confidential information spit it out to someone else, or my trade secrets being used to train something that will help the competition. So there's that. So a lot of clients, in fact, ask us not to use AI.
Because it's interesting. You have to give them a heads up before using AI if you're working on their file. Is that right?
Still, we do it as a policy.
Okay.
Or if we don't use any client data at all, that's cool. But whenever you use client document, client data, we do that. But then there's also other clients that will ask that you use AI. Because they want to pay less, because they expect you to be more productive and charge less. Back to that, paid by the hour thing. So there's that, right? It's a big challenge. It's a philosophical challenge, and I guess as tools will get better at segregating the sources of information and putting more trust in the system and the process, I guess we'll get there. But now that's our biggest impediment to adoption.
Scott, what do you struggle, if anything at all, philosophically speaking?
Sure, yeah. So I think these privacy concerns that Jocelyn mentioned are definitely top of mind for us as well. And I think the solution of segmenting data between clients, and when you're working on a client matter, being able to just isolate that client's data alone is going to be very powerful. So these are techniques that we've been working on for some time so that you're able to do that isolation. I think in this first wave of AI, you kind of suck up everything like a vacuum, and that has a lot of challenges, a lot of ethical concerns and things like that. So I'm really excited about solving that. I think, yes, that is 100% a challenge. And with all the law firms that we deal with, it's something that they all ask about and are concerned about. So. But I do think there's a solution through segmentation and telling your client, hey, we're going to use your data to help you with your matter, and it will not connect to anything else. It's not going to be sucked into the vacuum that feeds the AI beast or anything like that. So
yeah, I guess also understanding the process that goes behind training and learning. What the data is used for, and is it copied, reproduced, end up in other results. I guess that goes a long way into instilling trust as well.
Well, you opened the door. Can you take us through, talk to us as if we're not engineers. Talk to us about learning versus copying, for example, because I think this is probably a principle that many of us don't grasp. Sure.
So I think you're alluding to, I guess, the challenge of like copyright, and is this my data, and has my data been copied, and what do we do? What is the IP protection that is needed in these instances where data is vacuumed up and then used to produce something through AI? I think the main thing I would say on this point is that this is a novel phenomenon. This is not falling into existing frameworks that we have in place. And I think the most important thing for people to take away about these copyright issues is we need to come up with a new framework for dealing with this. Because these models are not taking your data or anyone's data, any data out there, and copying it and pasting it. What they're doing is kind of like, if I were to go and read a book of 100 Robert Frost poems, and then I sat down and tried really hard to write a poem in the style of Robert Frost, I think I could do a pretty good job of that, And that's sort of what large language models are doing as well. It's not exactly copying, it's learning, it is a form of learning, and coming up with its own novel takes oftentimes. And so but it's doing it, far better and faster than maybe a human could. That's the novel challenge. It would take me a long time to learn to mimic Robert Frost, but for a large language model, I could do it very, very quickly. So we have this novel, and of course, just being able to impersonate anyone or to do anything with the likeness of anyone, that is a challenge. It's an IP challenge and copyright challenge. So I think I don't have all the answers. I think we need a novel framework. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree with you because whether it's ingesting tens of thousands of New York Times articles or creating a voice in the like of Scarlett Johansson's, which I've asked ChatGPT, how would you describe Miss Johansson's voice, which the answer was husky, sultry, and distinctively raspy. So how do you end up with that, right? And of course, from a copyright standpoint, the content creators will say, hey, you can't have AI if you don't have content. And then on the other hand, you have the tech developers who say, pretty much as you say, and it's a super valid argument, I'm not actually reproducing the work, I'm just taking the essence of it and I'm learning from it. And this is a very tough question, and fortunately or not, this is being debated in front of courts right now. We'll have answers in a few months/years' time. And trust me, a lot of people will be disappointed with that because, as with court case, there's always a winner and a loser. So if the content creators win, then all the tech bros out there will say, hey, we live in a communist country that stifles innovation. And on the other hand, if it's decided that, hey, this is not actually reproduction, so copyright doesn't apply here, then you have all those content creators that say, hey, we've invested time, effort, sweat, and tears into that, and it all for nothing. And without our content, your tool doesn't exist. So I also think that there has to be some kind of other framework so people can get, of course, that's editorial. It's not legal at this point because, and I guess it ties back to what David was saying earlier as far as governance and policy. It has to be something for everyone in that because otherwise it just concentrates the value and the power into a limited number of players.
You mentioned Scarlett Johansson, and I think it's an example that because it made mainstream news, we're familiar with it, and she did threaten a lawsuit against OpenAI. David said only fools make predictions. We'll make an exception. You're not a fool, but if you were to guess, do you expect more of these types of lawsuits where people feel like their likeness was stolen? Yeah,
that's right. And I'm no expert in that area of law, but this is about what they call personality rights, which is your likeness. And for artists, it's their whole livelihood, right? So you couldn't end up with say, an actor, get captured, the digital twin of that actor is made, and then so long, we're going to send you a check now and then, but we don't need you anymore. We're going to make a shit ton of film with your digital twin. We don't need you anymore. So of course there's a whole policy aspect of that. There's a whole, and it also calls to the human experience, right? What is it to read, say, a poem made by an AI tool versus the real thing? And I don't think people will just like the look-alike or the AI-made thing. But anyway, that's maybe just me.
We'll follow that, and we'll come back to you.
For sure.
Scott, let's say you're back on this stage in exactly 1 year. What will you be talking about? What new products? What are you expecting to produce and introduce to us?
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest thing at that point that will have hit, this my prediction, maybe I'm a fool, but we have bet a big chunk of our company really that AI agents are kind of the next big thing that people will very much be talking about. They're talking about it today, but I think in a year it's going to be a much bigger thing. I think you'll see companies like OpenAI and ChatGPT pushing in that direction as well, going beyond these chat interfaces that are doing messages to now you have these AI assistants who are actually going out and doing things for you, opening up Microsoft Word documents, copying information between them, jumping around your computer probably and doing different things. And I think that it's going to be like, we haven't quite digested exactly what has happened with ChatGPT, and I think this next level of technology is sort of inevitable. And I think it's going to be very positive. And like, I think there will be a lot of, with every leap forward in technology, there's always skepticism and uncertainty, and the onus is on companies like ours to prove that this technology is useful and that it can be controlled, and that the downsides can be mitigated, and we take that responsibility really seriously. But there's also tremendous upsides of this, and from what we've seen, working with like 2,500 law firms around the world, they're adopting this technology so quickly, and it is benefiting the lawyers and the clients so much. And I think a lot of lawyers did not go to law school necessarily to spend 10 hours a day in Microsoft Word with like 10 Word documents on the screen, meticulously copying and pasting, between all these documents. I think, negotiation and strategy and building relationships with the client, working with the counterparty, these are things that are really important. So I'm really optimistic that ultimately the agent-based technology will bring more benefits in that direction. We're experts in the world of law specifically, but I think it will come to a lot of other verticals as well. One other point I'll make on the agent thing is this has already happened in the world of software engineering. So our company often takes what programmers are using in their work, and we bring it to lawyers, because the work's actually super similar. We were talking about this in backstage earlier. Writing a contract is really similar to writing a program. It's logic. You have to be really detail-oriented and make sure you don't make any mistakes. And
if there's one field that benefits from Gen AI, it's software programming, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So, and you'll often see, because the programmers are working on the AI technology while programming, you'll often see the technology bubble up there first. And you have seen AI agents come there where, I can be working on, say, our application. I can say, we need a new login page, and it has to have a login with Google button, and it's going to be blue with red on the borders. And I can tell an AI agent to go and make that, and it will go and open multiple files, draft all the code out for me in like a version 1 of that draft across multiple documents, and it will even go and test the code for me, and if anything is like clearly wrong, it will fix its mistakes. And so this has already happened in the world of software. These agent-based workflows, I think we'll hear a lot more about them over the next year or two in law and many other industries.
Can't wait to see that.
And so you said you work with 2,500 law firms. I imagine the resistance that you have now when you bring in a new product is much less than even only a year ago.
Yeah, much less. And I'll even say the resistance was not much even on day one when we launched our generative AI product, which was very surprising because we had been selling to law firms for a long time, and we'd raised money from investors, and they said, and software companies like ours have been trying to sell technology to law firms for forever. And it's hard to get tools adopted. Yeah. And investors would say, don't sell to lawyers. They're not ready to adopt technology. The last things they adopted were word processors and email, and they were very negative on the space. It was hard to raise money at the time. But the challenge was none of the technology was that helpful. A lot of the technology that companies were building was not that helpful for lawyers. But generative AI really immediately was, because law is so unstructured. The text is so unstructured. Programmers are trying to force lawyers into these very rigid templating workflows and things like that. It just didn't work that well most of the time. And we just, when we launched our Gen AI product, within 3 months, we had more law firms on board than we had brought on board in the last 3 years. So the uptake was really, really fast from the get-go. And I think the legal industry is one of the fastest adopters of the technology. So lawyers were ready to adopt tech. They just needed something that was helpful. Yeah. And and I saw a stat the other day that law firms have adopted AI 5 times faster than they adopted the cloud. So that's
unbelievable.
And yeah.
Who would have thunk that?
Yeah.
that lawyers. What are you? Thank you, Scott. What are you excited about as far as technology? What do you wish to see in the next year?
But you know what, this agent thing, for me, it's a big game changer. It's all about the workflow. It's about, mimicking what I do and just helping me do less of what I don't like and more of what I like. It's basically probably the simplest way to go about this. And and I'm super excited about that. Yeah.
I hope
I'm going to sign up for a trial.
I hope we get to catch up in a year to hear about both of your progressions. Justin Roger, thank you so much from Fasken. Scott Stevenson, thank you so much from Spellbook. I wish you much success with the next projects. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.